My roommate James and I lived in an old 8-story building that had seen better days. We were bartenders, and our apartment was the unofficial after-hours spot for anyone who didn't want the night to end. The building itself was a relic, with an elevator that groaned like it was in pain and security cameras that were as blind as bats. Our apartment overlooked a courtyard with a pool surrounded by open-air balconies that seemed to hang in the air like a promise of something better. It all started when packages began disappearing. Everyone got Ring cameras, hoping to catch the thief. But what we caught was far more unsettling. A man in his late 30s with a haggard face that seemed etched by a life of hard stories was trying to peek into our apartment. He didn't fit in with the typical Miami crowd. His clothes were too drab, his demeanor too skittish. James and I were in our mid-20s, and this guy gave us the creeps. We often went to Flanagan's, a local bar where the drinks were cheap, and the atmosphere was a mix of laughter and spilled secrets. One night, there he was, the same man from the camera, nursing a drink at the end of the bar and staring at us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. James, ever the hothead, confronted him. The man stuttered, denied everything, and looked so genuinely confused that we decided to leave it at that. We walked home with a girl James was seeing, and there he was again, emerging from the shadows, babbling something incomprehensible. James, fueled by alcohol and anger, didn't wait for an explanation. He punched the man, knocking him out cold. We left him there, sprawled in the grass, and ran back to our apartment. For days, everything was quiet. Then our Ring camera got ripped off. Our neighbor's camera, facing the courtyard, showed the man again, skulking around, peering through windows. A few days later, I came home to find our door unlocked. "James!" I shouted, irritated that he'd been so careless. But as I walked towards his room, the light spilling from under his door, I realized something was terribly wrong. Peeking in, my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't James. It was him, the man from the camera, rummaging through James's closet. Panic surged through me. My gun was in my room, but fear anchored me in place. I turned and ran, yelling for help. Neighbors poured out as the man dashed from our apartment, disappearing into the night. The next day, we plastered his picture all over the building and filed a police report. We never saw him again, but the feeling of being watched never left us. We moved out the next month, leaving the shadows and whispers of that old building behind. The night air clung to my skin like a second damp shirt. I just clocked out from another Friday night shift, the cacophony of the bar still ringing in my ears. My name is Terry, and I worked at a popular bar called The Playwright, a fixture on South Beach at the Tyne a few years ago. Tips filled my pockets, a satisfying weight against my thigh as I made my way home. The apartment I shared with Mara was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days, but it was ours. We had this little balcony, a concrete slab really, but it gave us a view across the street to a long-abandoned elementary school. It stood there, a hulking silhouette against the Miami skyline, silent and brooding. Chris and Julie, our fellow night owls and comrades in the art of bartending, lived just next door. Many a night we'd lean on the railing, drinks in hand, and muse about the stories that old building could tell. It had become our ritual, speculating about the boarded-up windows and the rumors that swirled around it like the ever-present beach winds. One story in particular had taken hold of our imaginations. It was about a man, long before we'd staked our claim to this little section of the beach, who had wandered into the basement of that school and come out rambling about cults and rituals. The story went that he was chased out by something he wouldn't speak of, his eyes darting to every shadow until the day he left town for good. That night, the tale felt more real, more inviting. Our laughter and skepticism were bolstered by a few too many post-shift shots, and the building seemed to beckon us. "Let's check it out," I said, the words out before my brain could reel them back. Mara's eyes danced with a mixture of excitement and fear, but she nodded. Chris clapped me on the back, his grin all the answer I needed. We found the window that had been pried open recently, its plywood barrier cast aside. We slipped through one by one, our phone lights piercing the musty darkness. The inside was a time capsule, a museum to a past that felt both distant and strangely alive. The detritus of childhood lay scattered about, desks, papers, a lone sneaker that might have once raced across the playground. Descending into the basement was like stepping into another world. The air grew colder, denser. The door to the tunnels beyond was ajar, the lock hanging broken. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to writhe in the edges of our light. And there, in the center of it all, was an altar. It looked recent, out of place against the backdrop of decay. We stood there, caught in a tableau of disbelief when the footsteps sounded, heavy, deliberate, coming towards us. My hand was at my side, gripping the small revolver I kept for protection. "Who's there?" I called, louder than I intended. The footsteps stopped, a beat of silence, then they retreated. We didn't wait to see more. The adventure had lost its luster. We stumbled back into the night, the adrenaline sobering us faster than cold water. By unspoken agreement, we returned to our balcony, watching as the first light of dawn began to outline the school. The figure appeared the next night. It stood motionless in the window of the building we had fled. We called the police, but they found nothing. After that, the school was sealed tight, the mystery locked inside. The days passed, but the feeling of being watched didn't. I could feel eyes on me, even in the crowded bar. At home, shadows seemed to linger in the corners of our vision. We stopped discussing the building, stopped standing out on the balcony. The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet unease that settled over our group like a shroud. I began to notice things. A figure in the crowd that disappeared when I blinked, whispers in the static of the radio. Mara became distant, jumping at sounds I couldn't hear. Chris and Julie moved away not long after, saying they needed a change. The bar no longer felt like refuge. It became a cage. I poured drinks mechanically, not bothering with the showmanship that had once been my signature. I felt eyes on me every night, following me home, watching me from the shadows. The school sits there still, a monument to our curiosity and fear. I pass it every day, but I never look too long. There's something there, something that I didn't notice was there before that night we went exploring. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed, and some things, once awakened, refuse to be still. Sometimes when the night is too quiet, I feel the need to look across the street to make sure there is no face in the window. The Abbey stood on the corner of South Beach like a monument to forgotten revelries, its Art Deco facade a testament to a bygone era. I, Gerson, had been tending bars across Miami for the better part of my 20s, but none like the Abbey. The place had history, a soul, and if you listened closely, it whispered secrets on the wind that blew in from the sea. It was in '48 when it first opened its doors, and from that day, the rumors swirled like the spirits in the bottles I poured. They said it was haunted. I scoffed at such tales, but deep down, a part of me thrummed with the thrill of the unknown. When Ray, the owner, decided to renovate, I saw my chance. Unemployment had been my unwanted companion since the last bar I worked at shuttered, and Ray was offering cash under the table to anyone willing to swing a hammer. I needed the money, so I took the hammer. The construction was a symphony of chaos. Workers came and went, each with their own eerie experience. Doors would slam shut, tools disappeared, only to reappear in impossible places. And the lights had a life of their own. My friend Angel would come by, his heavy-set frame always a comforting presence amidst the madness. He was a joker, the kind that could lighten the air with a laugh, but even he wasn't immune to the Abbey's antics. After the workers left each day, we'd sit amidst the sawdust and share stories. One sweltering afternoon, fueled by idle hands and a few too many beers, Angel suggested a seance. "Let's talk to him," he slurred, a mischievous glint in his eye. I should have said no. That night, as we sat in the skeletal remains of the bar, our hands lightly touching the planchette, the air shifted. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath. The planchette moved with a jerky life, spelling out nonsensical words at first. Then it stopped. We laughed it off until the laughter died on our lips. The air turned cold, and a voice, soft and sorrowful, emanated from the shadows. The weeks that followed were a blur. Objects flew across the room, mirrors shattered without provocation, and the sense of being watched was constant. The workers refused to return, leaving me alone to face the spirits of the Abbey. I couldn't leave. I needed the job. But I made a rule: no more night shifts. Yet even in the light of day, I felt eyes upon me, and I knew I wasn't alone. The Abbey was alive, and I was in its grip. As days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences became more intense. I would hear whispers echoing through the empty halls, calling my name in a haunting melody. The temperature would drop suddenly, leaving a chill that seeped into my bones. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the renovation, but the Abbey wouldn't let me. Ray was oblivious to the happenings. He was rarely there, busy with other ventures, leaving me to manage the chaos. I started researching the history of the Abbey, desperate for answers. I discovered it was built on the grounds of an old estate, one with a history as dark as the rumors suggested. There were tales of lost loves, tragic deaths, and unfulfilled promises. The more I read, the more I understood the sadness that seemed to permeate the walls. One evening, as I was locking up, I saw her. A woman dressed in a gown from another era, her eyes filled with an unspeakable sorrow. She was there one moment and gone the next, leaving me questioning my sanity. I confided in Angel, who, despite his initial skepticism, began to believe. We decided to delve deeper, to uncover the truth of the Abbey. We spent nights poring over old newspapers, digging into the estate's past. We learned of a woman, Isabella, who had lived there in the early 1900s. Her story was one of heartbreak. She had lost her fiancé in a tragic accident just days before their wedding. It was said she never recovered, her spirit forever wandering the grounds. Armed with this knowledge, we no longer doubted and stopped talking about it in unspoken agreement. The grand reopening was a success. The bar was filled with laughter and music, a far cry from the eerie silence that had once dominated. Patrons marveled at the beauty of the place, unaware of the history that lay within its walls. As for me, I continued to work there, serving drinks and only working day shifts, which turned out just fine. I've never had to be there at night since.